Sechus Kuddushin Daf Lamed Zayin begins the Gemara's commentary on the Mishnah, which concluded the last daf, which is discussing which mitzvahs are irrelevant only in Eretz Yisrael and which apply even in a Chutz La'aretz outside of Eretz Yisrael. The Mishnah defined them as mitzvahs hatluyos ba'aretz, mitzvahs which are dependent on the land, and mitzvahs she'ein hatluyos ba'aretz, which are not dependent on the land. So now the Gemara is going to discuss that as well as the exceptions. So the first sugya the Gemara has is what is the definition of dependent on the land and not dependent on the land. So Gemara goes through two possibilities. The first possibility the Gemara says is that the Torah says you should do a mitzvah when you come to Eretz Yisrael. Those are mitzvahs hatluyos ba'aretz. And if it's not said that when you come to Eretz Yisrael you'll do this mitzvah, that's a mitzvah she'ein hatluyos ba'aretz, and therefore it's relevant even outside of Eretz Yisrael. So the Gemara says they can't be correct because two of the mitzvahs where the Torah says to do it once you get to Eretz Yisrael are tefillin and redeeming the firstborn of a donkey. Tefillin, it says v'hoyeki v'yachal. Now we know that these most definitely apply in the Chutz La'aretz. It's ma'aseh b'chol that people put on tefillin and do pidyon petach chamar outside of Eretz Yisrael. So what then does it mean? So Gemara goes to its second option, which is Rav Yehuda, and he says anything which is an obligation on a person's body, that is, your body needs to do this, that's einay tluya ba'aretz. Anything which is an obligation on the land, that it's something to do with something growing from the ground, that's a mitzvah hatluyos ba'aretz and applies only in Eretz Yisrael. Now it says, what is the source? How do you know that this difference applies? And you know that there's a difference between tuliyos ba'aretz and einay tuliyos ba'aretz. So the Gemara brings a lengthy drasha from a pasuk in Devarim, and the Gemara brings the brisa. So the pasuk says as follows: Eila hachukim v'hamishpatim asher tishmon lasis ba'aretz asher nasan Hashem Elokei avesach halach l'rishta kol hayamim asher atem chayim al adama. And then it goes on to talk about destroying avodah zarah, abeid ta'abdu neskol mekayim asher avdu sham agayim. So what are all these things? Eila chukim v'hamishpatim asher tishmon ba'aretz kol hayamim. What are these things? So the Gemara says chukim refers to learning medrash. Mishpatim refers to learning halacha, chashem mishpat, the dinim. And it says asher tishmarun, that refers to learning mishnayos, which is halacha l'maisa, and therefore it's shmiras mitzvahs. And then it's lasais, that refers to actually doing the mitzvahs. Now, what about them? So it says to do it ba'aretz. So you might think that all these only apply in the aretz, but then it says kol hayamim asher atem chayim al adama, all the days which you live upon the earth. That means that it apply everywhere, not just when you live in Eretz Yisrael. So you have a conflict. It says ba'aretz and it says kol hayamim. So which is it? So the Gemara says therefore some mitzvahs apply only in Eretz Yisrael and some apply everywhere else. We clearly see that split from these drashas we have here in the pasuk. Now the question is, what's what? So therefore we look at the rest of the Indian. It says, destroy avodah zarah, abeid ta'abdun. So just as those are, the mitzvah of destroying avodah zarah is a mitzvah shebaguf, and therefore, and it applies whether you're in Eretz Yisrael or in Chutz La'aretz, any mitzvah shebaguf also applies even if you're in Chutz La'aretz. Therefore, a mitzvah that applies only in Eretz Yisrael would be a mitzvah hatulya ba'aretz. Gemara now refers back to the Mishnah, and the Gemara wants to discuss the next thing, where we had a machlokes as to what is the halach of chadash. Chadash is the mitzvah that we are not allowed to eat grain that has taken root after the bringing of the carbon omer until the next carbon omer. The question is, does that apply in Chutz La'aretz? So our Mishnah seems to say that it's a machlokes between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Eliezer, because we have a list of things that follow the rules of Tuluya Ba'aretz, Einay Tuluya Ba'aretz, and then the Tanna Kama says there's two exceptions. Arla and Kilayim are Tuluya Ba'aretz but apply in Chutz La'aretz, and then Rabbi Eliezer says even the Chadash. And the question is, what does he mean when he says even Chadash? And the Gemara says, is he arguing on the Tanna Kama and he's adding another exception? The Tanna Kama said the only two exceptions that apply in Chutz La'aretz, even though they're mitzvahs Tuluya Ba'aretz, are Arla and Kilayim, and he's saying no. Even Chadash also applies in Chutz La'aretz, even though it's mitzvahs Tuluya Ba'aretz. Or is it the opposite? Is the Tanna Kama meant to include Chadash also? And he didn't mention it, as we are about to see why. And Rabbi Eliezer is arguing, he says no. Even Chadash only applies in Eretz Yisrael, and he's disagreeing with the Tanna Kama the opposite way. Now, why should it be that way? What is the logic behind this machlokes? Behind these two ways of understanding what the machlokes is? So the Gemara says it's because of the word that's used in the parsha of Chadash. It says b'mosh v'seichem. The Torah says b'chol mosh v'seichem. You should not eat Chadash and b'chol mosh v'seichem. What does mosh v'seichem mean? What is that referring to? Simplest explanation would be that it's referring to anywhere in the world, and therefore it's saying that this is not limited just to Eretz Yisrael, and it's exeris hakasa from the pasuk that that's what it is. That would be the reason that the Tanna Kama wouldn't even mention it, even though the Tanna Kama agrees that's an exception, because the Tanna Kama holds that I don't have to mention it. Certainly, if the Torah tells you explicitly that it's in Chutz La'aretz, you can understand that. I only mention the things which are halach al Moshe Sinai. However, there's another explanation of Moshe V'Seichem, and it might be limited to Eretz Yisrael. But why does it say all your Moshe V'Seichem? It means after it's already settled, after it's already a Moshev, after the division, after the conquest and division of Eretz Yisrael. But really, it is limited to Eretz Yisrael only, and that could potentially be the position which Rabbi Elazar would argue. Now the question is, who holds which position? And the Gemara therefore has a shaila. Which one holds which? We see that there's a machlokes, but which one is which? The Gemara resolves this by quoting a statement of Abaye regarding a different machlokes that also surrounds the topic of Moshav. And the same machlokes, does Moshav mean after the Chalukah, but only in Eretz Yisrael, or does it mean anywhere, even outside Eretz Yisrael? That's a machlokes between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva as to where Nesachim apply, on which Mizbechos do Nesachim apply, and Rabbi Shmuel over there says that the word Moshav means only in Eretz Yisrael, but it means after the division and settlement of Eretz Yisrael. And Rabbi Akiva says it means everywhere. On that, Abaye says that Rabbi Shmuel is the same opinion as the Tanna Kama here. So you see that the Tanna Kama is specifically holding in Eretz Yisrael, and therefore Rabbi Eliezer, who's arguing, is saying no, this one is a third exception to the rule of Mrs. Hatulis Baris, and it applies even outside of Eretz Yisrael. Now, over there in that discussion, the brisa between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva, the Gemara says that Rabbi Akiva had asked a kasha to Rabbi Shmuel, which was, what about Shabbos? Shabbos, it also says Moshe, but Shabbos clearly applies outside of Eretz Yisrael. And so how could you say that, therefore, Moshe is only in Eretz Yisrael? And Rabbi Shmuel answered, Shabbos has a special kavod chaymer. Shabbos is a mitzvah chomer. If a mitzvah kal applies even in Chutz La'aretz, and mitzvah chomer applies even in Chutz La'aretz as well. So now the Gemara has a kasha. Bishmol only said it by Nesachim. Nesachim, it says, when you will come into Eretz Yisrael, then you should bring it in all your moishavos. It says, Ki savayol Eretz moishvoi seichem. So there, so there it's referring to, it says specifically your come. So when it says Moshav after, it says you came into Eretz Yisrael, of course there Rabbi Shmuel says that means only in Eretz Yisrael. But how do you know Rabbi Shmuel says the same thing here where it doesn't say that when you come into Eretz Yisrael? So Gemara explains that Rabbi Shmuel is coming to say that even in the Parsha of Chadash, when it says Moshav, it's talking about only when you come into Eretz Yisrael, and the Torah is almost explicitly telling me when you'll come into Eretz Yisrael. Where do you see that? So you see that because Rabbi Shmuel holds that there was no Nesachim in the Midbar. They only started bringing Nesachim when they came into Eretz Yisrael. Therefore it says, if the Torah is saying when you'll come into Eretz Yisrael, nevertheless, it still only says that you should do it Moishvais, meaning in Eretz Yisrael, but after the settlement of Eretz Yisrael. Now Rabbi Akiva disagrees. Rabbi Akiva says they brought Nesachim in the Midbar as well. And therefore when it says Moishav, it never said when you come into Eretz Yisrael. So the Gemara asks if that was Rabbi Shmuel's taina, because he understands that it says when you come into Eretz Yisrael. So why didn't he answer Rabbi Akiva when he asked him from Shabbos? Why didn't he answer him Shabbos? It doesn't say when you come into Eretz Yisrael. That's why it doesn't apply only in Eretz Yisrael. Why do you have to say there's a kavod chaymer? So the Gemara says he could have said that answer. He was really saying two answers. He said, first of all, it doesn't say when you come into Eretz Yisrael there. Shabbos applied even in the Midbar. Second of all, there's a kavod chaymer, and therefore you don't have a kasha. Now, we talked about when it says Bia and Moshav together, it says coming to Eretz Yisrael as well as Moshav, B'chol Moshav Seichem. We talked about when it says just Moshav. Now the question is, what happens when it says just Bia? Just is coming to Eretz Yisrael and it doesn't say Moshav. So how do you understand that? So the question is going to be, does it apply right away when you come into Eretz Yisrael, or does it only apply after Moshav? Do you automatically assume that it's after the settlement and the division of Eretz Yisrael? So the Gemara says there's actually contradiction between two Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuels. The Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel that we quoted just now seems to say clearly that it's only if you have Bia and Moshav. If you just say Bia, it would apply right away. There's a different Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel that says that even if it just says Bia, you assume that it's only after Yeshivas Eretz Yisrael. And that, Tana Debei Shmuel learns from the Parsha of putting a king creating the melech. So, and it says when you create the king, it says that it should be only after the splitting and the division. We learn from there that every time it says come into Eretz Yisrael, it means you should only do it after the division. That is when you're in Eretz Yisrael. Any mitzvah in Eretz Yisrael applies to that at that point. So what is the first time of the Rebbe Shmuel hold? Why don't you learn from a king to everywhere else? So my answer is because it says the same thing by Bikurim, that the mitzvah of Bikurim only applies after the settlement and the division. So why do you have to say it twice? To teach you that only these two you have to wait till after those years, but all of the mitzvahs where it says when you come into Eretz Yisrael applies as soon as you get into Eretz Yisrael. Now, what's the first time to hold? It says so he says no, it's not Sheikh Suvan Bayin Ke'echad. Is only when I would know one without the other. Here, I wouldn't know one without the other. If it would have only told me that the mitzvah of Bikurim applies right away, I would say that's because Bikurim, you eat the fruits as soon as you get there. But what does a king have to do with as soon as you get there? A king, you'll settle a king when you are ready to set up the country after the settlement and the division of the land. Says the Gemara, if I would have only said by the king, then the king, I would understand, you need to have a king right away as soon as you get into Eretz Yisrael, because you need a king to help with the war. Kings are good at conquering things. However, the fruits, the bikurim, maybe that could wait. The other Tana, the Gemara says, would say true, but you could still learn out of Chala. The mitzvah of Chala, it clearly applies right away. You don't have to wait till after the settlement of the land. And if we learn bikurim from Chala, that they are related, and I would say that therefore you don't have to wait. Okay, now the Gemara moves on to a list of other mitzvahs that most certainly apply in Chutz La'aretz, based on the rule that any mitzvah shebegufay applies in Chutz La'aretz. Has nothing to do with the land. The Gemara wants to know, why does it say Moshev in all those places? Moshev, we said, is to tell you it applies even outside Eretz Yisrael, according to at least one opinion. Why does it say Moshev there? So the first question is Shabbos. Why does it say B'chol Moshev Yisechem by Shabbos? So the Gemara answers, I would think since Shabbos is written together with Yom Tov, and Yom Tov requires Kiddush HaChodesh, the Beis has to be Mekadesh Yisrael V'Azmanim. You would think Shabbos also requires Kiddush, requires some level of the Beis's involvement, and that can only happen in Eretz Yisrael. There's no Kiddush of Kiddush HaChodesh and Kiddush Yom Tov outside of Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, that's to tell me Moishvais. So now we're going to ask the Isser of eating Chelev, certain forbidden fats, and the blood of an animal. There it also says Moishav. Why does it say that? So the Gemara answers because the Isser is written together with Karbonis, and therefore you would think it only applies when there are Karbonis. You have to tell me even when there is no Karbonis. Now, Matzah and Morer, it says Moishav there. Again, that's not a mitzvah Tlius Bar, so why does the Torah have to tell me it applies everywhere? But so you need to go, it says Al Matzah Samerim Echluhu, that you eat the matzah and the mar together with the carbon pesach. You may think you only eat matzah and mar when there is a carbon pesach. He said, teach me even when there's no carbon pesach. Now the mar switches and it says, why does it have to say biyah? Why does it have to say when you go into Eretz Yisrael by tefillin and pidyon petach hamar? They apply even outside of Eretz Yisrael, so why does the Torah say when you go into Eretz Yisrael? The Torah says you need that, like there's a brisa of debate, Rebbe Shmuel, that you need to do this mitzvah in order to get the schus of going into Eretz Yisrael.